Welcome to the Deep Sleep Science Channel. Tonight, we're exploring one of the deepest mysteries you carry with you, every second your own consciousness. The same quiet awareness that lets you hear this voice, remember your past, imagine your future, and feel the world around you, is something science still cannot fully explain. You'll discover how your brain can create entire worlds while you sleep, how people can be conscious without moving or speaking, how your sense of self can shift, fade, or even disappear, and why your mind is far more flexible than it feels. Before you drift off, take a gentle moment to like, subscribe, or leave a comment, and then let your thoughts soften as we slowly uncover what it really means to be aware. At the heart of consciousness is a very simple but astonishing idea. It is the presence of subjective experience. It is the fact that there is something it feels like to be here at all. There is something it feels like to see light, to hear a sound, to remember a voice, or to notice your own thoughts. That inner felt quality is what makes consciousness so extraordinary, because it turns the world from mere information into lived experience. A person can be fully awake and still not be fully aware. This is why researchers separate arousal from awareness. Arousal is the general state of being awake or activated, while awareness is the presence of actual experience and understanding of what is happening. In everyday life, these often go together, but they do not always match perfectly, and that mismatch has taught science a great deal. Modern science can measure brain activity, behavior, responses, and patterns of attention with remarkable precision. Yet, one great mystery remains untouched at its center. Scientists can observe the brain when someone reports pain, color, memory, or fear, but they still do not fully know why any of those processes should feel like anything from the inside. That gap between measurable activity and lived experience is one of the great unanswered questions of human knowledge. One of the oldest ways scientists study consciousness is by comparing it across very different states. They look at ordinary wakefulness, then compare it with sleep, anesthesia, seizures, coma, and psychedelic states. By watching what changes and what remains, researchers can begin to see which features seem essential for experience and which belong only to certain forms of it. Consciousness becomes easier to study when it is seen in contrast. Consciousness is not the same thing as intelligence. A system can solve problems, follow patterns, store information, or make complex responses without giving clear evidence that anything is being experienced from within. This is why intelligence and consciousness are studied as different questions. One concerns what a system can do, and the other concerns whether there is an inner point of view attached to those abilities. It is also not the same as attention. Attention helps select information, strengthen signals, and guide behavior, but not everything attended becomes consciously experienced. In the same way, some things seem to rise into awareness with very little deliberate attention at all. This is why attention and consciousness are often treated as deeply related, but still separate parts of the mind. No single theory of consciousness has one general agreement, even after decades of careful work. Many serious theories explain different parts of the problem, but none has been accepted as the final answer. That ongoing disagreement is important because it shows how difficult the subject truly is. Even among experts, the question of what consciousness fundamentally requires is still open. Recent efforts to test major theories against one another have shown that some of their strongest predictions were not supported as cleanly as supporters expected. This is valuable because it means the field is moving beyond abstract debate and into direct comparison. Consciousness science is becoming more rigorous, and that has revealed both progress and uncertainty at the same time. Outward behavior alone can be misleading when clinicians try to judge consciousness. A person may seem unresponsive, and still preserve some inner awareness, while another may appear wakeful without clearly experiencing the world in a meaningful way. This is one reason assessments of consciousness are so difficult. What can be seen from the outside does not always tell the whole story of what is happening within. Science has gradually moved away from the idea that consciousness lives in one tiny spot inside the brain. Instead, many researchers now think it depends on patterns of interaction across multiple systems working together. This change matters because it suggests consciousness is not a single hidden switch, but a kind of organized activity spread across many connected parts of the brain. Conscious experience usually feels unified. You do not normally experience color in one place, sound in another, and your sense of self in a third. Yet neuroscience shows that many ingredients of experience are processed in parallel by specialized systems. This means the smooth unity of consciousness is not a simple starting point. It is something the brain actively achieves. Split brain research has shown that the unity of consciousness may be more complex than people once believed. Even when the major connection between the brain's hemispheres is cut, some forms of coordinated experience can remain. This has forced researchers to think more carefully about what it really means for consciousness to be one, and whether its unity is absolute or partly constructed. Brain imaging can show striking correlations with awareness, but it cannot directly reveal what a person's experience feels like. A scan may show which regions are active when someone sees a face or feels pain, but it does not give direct access to the inner quality of that experience. This is one reason consciousness remains such a difficult subject. Objective tools can approach it, but not fully step inside it. Self-consciousness is not only about thinking thoughts about yourself. It also depends on sensing your own body from within. Breathing, heartbeat, pain, temperature, pressure, and the condition of internal organs all contribute to the feeling of being a living self. The experience of being you is therefore tied not just to ideas and memories, but also to the steady background signals of the body. Two people can consciously experience the same event in different ways because awareness is influenced by expectation and context, not only by raw sensation. What the brain expects, fears, values, or has learned before can shape how the present is felt. This helps explain why the same sound, image, or event can seem meaningful, pleasant, threatening, or ordinary to different minds. Placebo effects show that expectation can measurably change conscious pain and well-being. When a person expects relief, that expectation can alter real experience in the body and brain. This does not mean the effect is fake. It means the mind's interpretation of what is happening can become part of what is actually felt. Conscious experience is shaped not only by incoming signals, but also by meaning. Blindsight is one of the strangest findings in consciousness research. Some people with damage to primary visual areas can still guess the location or movement of an object in a blind part of space, even while honestly reporting that they saw nothing there. This shows that visual processing and visual awareness can come apart. The brain can still do something with information that never becomes fully seen. Electrical stimulation near the right temporoparietal junction has, in some cases, triggered out-of-body experiences. People may feel as if they are located somewhere other than where their physical body is. Findings like this suggest that self-location is not a fixed truth simply handed to the mind by the body. It is something the brain constructs, moment by moment, out of many signals working together. Dreaming is one of the clearest examples of internally generated consciousness. In a dream, a person can see places, hear voices, feel emotions, and move through events without needing current input from the outside world. The brain can create an entire lived scene from within itself. That makes dreaming one of the most fascinating natural windows into how consciousness can exist in very different forms. Lucid dreaming is especially remarkable because it combines immersive dreaming with a return of self-awareness. In that state, the dreamer becomes aware that the experience is a dream while still remaining inside it. Some reflective awareness comes back online, even though full waking has not arrived. This shows that consciousness is not locked into a few rigid boxes, but can occupy hybrid forms. Many modern theories of consciousness focus on large-scale integration across the brain, rather than isolated activity in a single small area. The idea is that consciousness may depend on many parts of the brain sharing information in an organized way. Instead of asking only where consciousness is, researchers increasingly ask how widely and how effectively information is being combined. The global neuronal workspace theory proposes that information becomes conscious when it is amplified and made broadly available to many brain systems at once. In this view, a piece of information is not fully conscious when it stays local and private. It becomes conscious when it is broadcast widely enough to be used by memory, language, decision-making, and flexible action. Integrated information theory takes a different path and asks how much a system forms a unified whole but cannot be reduced to separate independent parts. According to this idea, consciousness depends on the degree to which a system is both highly connected and richly structured. The more the system acts as an integrated whole with many distinct internal relationships, the stronger consciousness may be. Higher-order theories suggest that a mental state becomes conscious when the mind represents itself as being in that state. In simple terms, it is not enough merely to have a sensation or perception. Some form of mental awareness of that state must also occur. These theories place special importance on the mind's ability to take itself as an object. Representational theories describe conscious states as states that carry a certain kind of content about the world or the self. On this view, what matters is not just that the brain is active, but what that activity is representing. Consciousness is then tied to meaningful content, to the structured way experience presents something as being a certain way. Because infants, animals, and non-communicating patients cannot always report their experiences, scientists use markers of consciousness instead of relying only on spoken description. These markers can include flexible behavior, brain complexity, command following, and patterns of network activity. They are imperfect tools, but they help researchers look for signs of awareness when direct report is not possible. The study of consciousness is unusually broad and interdisciplinary. It brings together neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, anesthesiology, psychiatry, computer science, and ethics. Each field approaches the problem from a different angle. Some study brain mechanisms, some study behavior, some study logic and meaning, and some study the moral importance of conscious experience itself. The contents of consciousness are selective. The brain processes vastly more information than ever reaches awareness. At any given moment, only a small part of what is being sensed, remembered, predicted, or prepared becomes part of the conscious field. This selectivity is one reason experience feels manageable, even though the underlying brain activity is enormous and complex. Some definitions of consciousness emphasize phenomenal experience, meaning the raw felt quality of being in a state. Others emphasize access, meaning whether information can be used by thought, report, or control. Still others focus on reportability or cognitive availability. These different definitions show that the word consciousness covers several related ideas, not always one single thing. Philosophers often distinguish state consciousness from creature consciousness. A state can be conscious, as when a particular perception or thought is experienced. A creature can also be conscious, as when an organism is awake and aware in a broader sense. The distinction helps separate the question of what kinds of experiences exist from the question of what kind of being is having them. Many scientists treat consciousness as graded in some contexts. Experience can grow dimmer, narrower, more fragmented, or less stable without vanishing completely. Instead of always switching sharply on or off, it may sometimes change by degree. This is especially useful when thinking about drowsiness, anesthesia, brain injury, and other states where awareness may become partial. Although there is no single agreed seat of consciousness, some brain regions appear again and again across different theories. These include frontal, parietal, cingulate, insular, and thalamic systems. Their repeated appearance does not prove that one of them alone creates consciousness, but it suggests that these regions play central roles in shaping awareness, coordination, and self-related processing. The thalamus is often treated as especially important because it helps coordinate communication across large parts of the cortex. It is deeply involved in wakefulness and in the organized flow of information through the brain. When researchers study how awareness is maintained or lost, the thalamus often appears as a key part of the story. Conscious states are usually associated with richer and more differentiated brain activity than deeply unconscious states. In other words, the brain in consciousness tends to show more varied and organized patterns, rather than simple, uniform behavior. This richness may be one reason conscious experience can hold so many distinct qualities at once while still feeling coherent. A default mode network is strongly linked to self-related thought, autobiographical memory, and internally generated experience. It becomes especially relevant when the mind is turned inward, toward memory, imagination, reflection, or the sense of personal identity. Far from being an idle system, it appears to help organize the inner landscape of conscious thought. Conscious perception often involves recurrent processing, meaning signals do not just travel one way from lower areas to higher ones. Instead, information loops back and forth between regions. These repeated exchanges may help stabilize and refine what becomes consciously experienced. Awareness may depend not only on receiving information, but on repeatedly shaping it. Conscious contents tend to be stable enough to be used by memory, language, decision-making, and flexible action. This stability matters. A signal that flashes through the brain too briefly or too privately may influence behavior without becoming part of awareness. Conscious contents, by contrast, often linger long enough to be thought about, described, compared, and acted upon. Researchers distinguish neural correlates of consciousness from prerequisites and consequences of consciousness. This means they try not to confuse brain activity, but helps produce awareness with activity that comes before it or follows after it. Not every signal linked to a conscious event is the event's direct cause. This careful separation helps keep the science more precise. The cortex contributes heavily to the contents and structure of experience. Perception, imagery, language-linked thought, scene construction, and many aspects of self-modeling all depend strongly on cortical processing. While other systems support wakefulness and coordination, the cortex appears deeply involved in shaping what consciousness is actually like. Some evidence suggests that posterior cortical regions are especially important for specific conscious contents, such as visual scenes and body-related experience. These regions help organize the feel of what is seen and how the body is located and represented. This has led some researchers to think that certain parts of awareness depend more on posterior systems than earlier theories assumed. Other evidence highlights frontal systems for rapport, control, confidence, and global access. Frontal regions often seem especially involved when information is not merely experienced, but also evaluated, described, held in mind, and used flexibly. This has kept frontal areas central to debates about how consciousness connects to reflection and cognitive control. The Perturbational Complexity Index, often called PCI, was developed to estimate how integrated and differentiated the brain's response is after stimulation. By combining brain stimulation with EEG, researchers can study how richly and widely the brain reacts. This has become useful because it can sometimes help distinguish conscious from unconscious conditions, even when a person cannot speak or move. Conscious states often seem to require both integration and differentiation at the same time. Many parts of the brain must interact, but they must not all collapse into doing exactly the same thing. A conscious system appears to be both united and varied. That balance may be one of the deepest organizing principles behind awareness. When the brain becomes overly synchronized, consciousness can diminish because informational diversity is lost. If too many regions behave in one uniform rhythm, the system may become less capable of supporting rich, differentiated experience. This is why more activity is not always better. The pattern and variety of activity matter greatly. Neural oscillations are studied because different brain rhythms help coordinate perception, memory, attention, and awareness across regions. These rhythms act like timing structures, helping distant areas work together without becoming chaotic. Consciousness may depend partly on this careful timing, on signals arriving together or in the right sequence to create a coherent experience. Consciousness research often treats the brain as predictive. In this view, awareness reflects not only raw sensory input, but also what the brain expects to find. Experience is shaped by incoming evidence and by internal models built from past learning. This helps explain why perception is fast and meaningful, but also why it can sometimes be distorted. Metacognition adds another layer to consciousness by allowing the mind to evaluate its own perceptions, memories, and decisions. It is the capacity to notice that you may be uncertain, mistaken, or confident. This reflective ability does not replace experience, but it adds a second level to it, making awareness not just something we have, but something we can think about. The conscious self includes more than a name, a face, or a personal story. It also includes ownership, the sense that this body is mine agency, the sense that I caused this action self-location, the sense of where I am and first-person perspective, the sense that experience is happening from here. Together, these dimensions help shape the feeling of being someone. Conscious experience of time feels smooth and continuous, even though the brain works through overlapping events and brief processing windows. We do not usually experience the world as a sequence of disconnected frames. Instead, the mind seems to gather events into a flowing present. That temporal stitching is one of the quiet achievements of consciousness. This temporal integration helps explain why music, speech, and moving scenes are experienced as coherent wholes rather than scattered instants. A melody only becomes a melody because the mind carries earlier notes forward into the present. Speech only makes sense because words are linked across time. Consciousness does not merely hold moments, it binds them. Consciousness is therefore not just about what is present right now. It is also about how the present is woven together with the immediate past and the near future. Experience carries traces of what just happened and expectations of what may come next. In that sense, consciousness is always slightly extended, always more than a frozen instant. In ordinary waking life, consciousness can change from moment to moment far more than people usually notice. A person can be focused, distracted, drowsy, mentally elsewhere, or vividly absorbed, sometimes within a short stretch of time. This shows that awareness is not a fixed beam that shines at the same strength all day. It is a living process that narrows, widens, brightens, and softens depending on the brain, the body, the environment, and the task at hand. Brain injury has taught scientists a great deal about consciousness because it can remove certain abilities while leaving others behind. A person may lose language but keep awareness, or lose reliable movement while still preserving inner experience. These patterns reveal that consciousness is not made of just one ability. It depends on many systems, and when some are damaged, the structure of awareness can become easier to study. The phrase, "what it is like," became famous in the study of consciousness because it captures something ordinary words often miss. Consciousness is not only about processing information or reacting to the world. It is about there being an inner side to life at all. There is something it feels like to taste, to hear, to ache, to remember, and to wonder. That inner feel is the heart of the subject. The study of time consciousness asks how the mind experiences change, motion, and flow, rather than only isolated moments. Human experience is not a sequence of still photographs. We directly experience movement, unfolding speech, and passing music. This means the mind must somehow hold together more than one instant at once, creating a lived present that has width and continuity. Some patients can show wake-like eye-opening without clear signs of awareness. This has been one of the most important discoveries in clinical consciousness research. It shows that wakefulness alone is not enough to guarantee meaningful inner experience. The body may seem awake from the outside, yet the deeper signs of awareness may be very limited or difficult to detect. Other patients show the opposite pattern. They may be fully conscious, hearing and understanding what is happening around them, yet almost unable to move or speak. This reminds us that movement and awareness are not the same thing. A mind can remain present even when the body can barely express it, which is why careful testing is so important. Some of the most important questions in consciousness science concern whether the cortex is absolutely required for awareness. Many findings suggest that cortical integration is central to the contents of experience, yet other findings show that deeper brain systems are crucial for maintaining the conditions that make awareness possible. This has led to a more balanced view, in which consciousness may depend on cooperation between cortical and subcortical systems. Another major open question is whether consciousness can be explained by one core mechanism, or whether it depends on several overlapping mechanisms working together. It may be that no single idea fully captures the whole phenomenon. Different parts of consciousness, such as wakefulness, sensory vividness, selfhood, reportability, and reflection, may rely on different but interacting processes. During normal wakefulness, distant brain regions tend to exchange information more flexibly than they do in many unconscious states. This flexible communication matters because conscious experience often combines sensation, memory, emotion, meaning, and action at the same time. For that to happen, the brain cannot remain divided into isolated islands. It needs ways to coordinate across distance. Damage or disruption to large-scale brain communication can narrow the field of consciousness even when some local processing remains intact. A person may still have sensory responses or small pockets of preserved function, but the broader unity of awareness can weaken. This suggests that consciousness depends not only on what each region does alone, but on how regions work together as a system. Anesthesia often reduces consciousness partly by weakening connectivity among large-scale cortical networks. Rather than simply turning the brain off, some anesthetic drugs seem to interfere with the brain's ability to integrate information across widespread regions. The result is a breakdown in the organized communication that normally supports conscious experience. Some altered states do not simply suppress brain activity. Instead, they can increase the diversity of neural signals. This is especially interesting because it shows that consciousness is not always reduced when brain patterns change. In some cases, experience becomes stranger, more fluid, or more varied, and the brain's activity also becomes less rigidly organized. Psychedelic states are often described this way because activity becomes less separated into strict networks and more cross-connected across systems that are usually more distinct. This may help explain why people in such states can report unusual blending of perception, meaning, and self-experience. The normal structure of consciousness loosens, and different forms of experience can mix more freely. The insula is often studied because it helps represent internal bodily signals. It is deeply involved in how the brain senses what is happening inside the body, including heartbeat, breathing, pain, temperature, and visceral sensations. Because of that, it may play an important role in the conscious feeling of being a living organism rather than just a detached observer. Interoceptive signaling gives the brain constant information about the body's internal condition. Much of this signaling happens outside awareness, yet some of it enters consciousness and contributes to felt states such as comfort, tension, hunger, nausea, calmness, or pain. These inner signals help shape emotion and selfhood, making consciousness deeply embodied. Many theories of feeling treat body-based signals as foundational for the sense of self. On this view, the mind does not first exist as a pure thinker and then notice the body afterward. Instead, part of the basic sense of being here comes from the body's continuous internal signals. Consciousness is therefore not only about seeing the world, but also about being a body within it. Consciousness can turn outward toward the environment or inward toward memories, imagination, planning, and reflection. These are not separate minds, but different directions of the same awareness. Sometimes the mind is anchored in sights and sounds around us. At other times, it is occupied with what is absent, possible, remembered, or feared. Both forms are central parts of conscious life. Mind-wandering is a common form of internally directed consciousness. During it, attention drifts away from the current task and moves toward thoughts, memories, fantasies, or unfinished concerns. This does not mean the mind has stopped working. In many cases, it has simply changed direction, leaving the outside world less central for a while. A large portion of conscious thought is future-oriented rather than strictly tied to the present moment. People often think about what might happen later, what they should say, what they hope for, or what they need to avoid. This ability to mentally move ahead in time is one of the mind's most powerful features, and it deeply shapes conscious life. The brain regions linked to self-generated thought overlap with those involved in autobiographical memory and social imagination. This is not surprising, because when people drift inward, they often think about their past, their future, and other people. Consciousness is not only a mirror of the present. It is also a place where memory and imagination continually meet. Expectations influence awareness because the brain does not wait passively for the world to arrive. It constantly prepares, predicts, and interprets. This means that conscious experience is partly built from educated guesses shaped by past learning. Perception is therefore not a raw copy of reality, but a guided construction that usually works very well and sometimes misleads us. This is one reason two people can consciously experience the same situation differently. The brain of each person brings a different history, a different emotional background, and a different set of expectations. One person may see danger where another sees opportunity. One may notice beauty where another notices noise. Consciousness is grounded in the world, but it is filtered through the mind. Nocebo effects show that negative expectations can worsen conscious symptoms. If a person strongly expects pain, side effects, or discomfort, that expectation can shape real experience. This is not simply a matter of imagination in the casual sense. It reflects the deep way in which meaning, belief, and bodily processing interact within conscious life. Visual awareness depends on much more than signals entering the eyes. Those signals must be selected, interpreted, stabilized, and integrated across many levels of the brain. This is why seeing is not just the arrival of light. It is a structured achievement of the nervous system, turning patterns of input into objects, scenes, depth, motion, and meaning. The brain can preserve fragments of processing even after major damage, and this reveals that conscious experience is assembled from many components. Some abilities may remain, while others vanish. A person may detect motion but not color, or location but not shape. These dissociations help show that awareness is built from multiple systems that normally work together so smoothly that they feel like one. Working memory is closely related to consciousness because it involves holding information in an active, usable form. When something is consciously present in the mind and available for thought, comparison, or action, it often overlaps with working memory. Yet the relationship is still debated, because some information may be briefly maintained without becoming fully experienced. Some experiments suggest that a stimulus can guide later behavior even when the subject says they did not consciously see it. This is important because it shows the brain can process and use information below the level of reportable awareness. Consciousness is therefore not the same as all mental processing. It is the special portion that becomes part of lived experience. Conscious perception is often linked to flexible use. When information can be described, compared, reasoned about, remembered, and used in new ways, it is more likely to be conscious. This is one reason conscious contents are often thought to enter a broader workspace in the mind. They are not just present. They become available for many different purposes. Confidence judgments can reveal subtle awareness that simple yes or no reports may miss. A person may say they are guessing, yet their level of confidence may still carry useful information about what they partly sensed or partly knew. This has made confidence an important tool in consciousness research because it adds a finer layer to the study of awareness. The conscious field is limited and different contents compete for access. At any moment, the brain has far more available information than awareness can fully hold. Some signals become central, while others remain faint or never arrive in experience at all. This competition is one reason attention, relevance, and emotional importance matter so much. Consciousness is serial in some respects because only a limited amount of content can dominate flexible thought and report at one time. You can switch quickly between ideas, but you cannot make all possible contents equally central at once. This gives conscious life its narrow spotlight quality, even though the mind as a whole is processing much more in parallel. At the same time, consciousness is parallel in other ways. A single moment of experience can include sound, color, bodily feeling, emotion, memory, and meaning, all together. So, awareness is not purely a single file line. It is more like a unified scene containing many elements at once, even while only some of them become the main focus. Perception is not a literal copy of the world. It is an active model built by the brain. Context, expectation, bodily state, and prior learning all help shape what is consciously experienced. This is why illusions are so valuable to science. They show that consciousness is not merely receiving the world, but interpreting it. Body ownership illusions show how strongly conscious self-experience depends on multisensory integration. When sight, touch, and timing are carefully aligned, the brain can be led to treat an external object as part of the body. This reveals that the feeling of my body is not fixed once and for all. It is actively maintained through coordinated signals. In the rubber hand illusion, a fake hand can begin to feel as though it belongs to the person when touch on the real hidden hand is synchronized with what the person sees happening to the fake one. This is a powerful example of how consciousness builds body ownership from matching information rather than from direct certainty. Attention can strengthen or weaken body ownership illusions, showing that even basic self-experience is influenced by top-down factors. The conscious self is not created only from incoming sensation. It also depends on how the mind organizes and weights those sensations. Even the sense of bodily identity can shift when attention shifts. Conscious bodily selfhood depends on matching vision, touch, proprioception, and expectation. When these streams agree, the body feels stable and naturally one's own. When they conflict, the sense of body can become strange, shifted, or uncertain. This tells us that conscious selfhood is maintained through ongoing agreement among many signals. The sense of agency is the feeling that you are causing your own actions and their effects. It is one of the key pieces of everyday consciousness. Usually, actions feel as though they come from within and unfold under our control. But research shows that this feeling is partly inferred, built from the brain's predictions and the observed results of movement. Agency is important because it helps define the boundary between self-caused and externally caused events. Without it, actions and outcomes can feel detached from the self. This is why agency is central not only to movement, but also to responsibility, identity, and ordinary conscious experience. Agency can be experimentally altered, which shows that conscious control is not as transparent as it feels. In certain settings, people can be led to feel more or less responsible for an action or effect, depending on timing, context, and expectation. This suggests that the feeling of willing is partly constructed after the brain compares prediction and outcome. Disturbances of agency are relevant to psychiatry because some symptoms involve the experience that one's thoughts or actions are being controlled by something outside the self. These conditions reveal how delicate the normal sense of personal control can be. When the mechanisms supporting agency are disturbed, conscious life can become deeply altered. The present in consciousness is not a mathematical instant. It has some duration, some spread. This is why we can experience movement, rhythm, speech, and melody directly rather than reconstructing them later from isolated pieces. The mind gathers small stretches of time into one meaningful lived moment. Many theories of consciousness have focused too much on still images of the mind and not enough on flow. But real experience is dynamic. It unfolds, carries momentum, and changes continuously. To understand consciousness, it is not enough to know what is in awareness. We also need to understand how one conscious moment becomes the next. This temporal binding helps speech sound like speech rather than separate noises. It helps music sound like music rather than random notes. It helps events feel connected rather than scattered. Consciousness is therefore not only a field of contents, it is also a process of temporal organization. Sleep shows that consciousness can fade, fragment, or transform without the brain becoming inactive. Even when outward engagement decreases, the brain may still generate inner experiences. This makes sleep extremely useful for science because it reveals how consciousness can change form while the person remains alive, responsive only in limited ways and largely cut off from the environment. Awakenings from REM sleep are especially likely to produce reports of vivid dreams filled with imagery, emotion, motion, and narrative. REM sleep has therefore become one of the most important windows into internally generated consciousness. It shows how the brain can create a full experiential world without needing the outside one to guide it closely. Non-REM sleep can also contain dreams, though they are often less vivid and more thought-like on average. This discovery was important because it challenged the older idea that dreaming belonged only to REM sleep. Conscious experience in sleep turned out to be more widespread and varied than earlier simple models suggested. Dream recall depends heavily on when a person is awakened. Many sleep experiences may vanish simply because memory for them fades rapidly if the person is not interrupted at the right moment. This teaches an important lesson. Not remembering an experience does not prove that no experience occurred. Sleeping consciousness is often disconnected from the environment while remaining vivid internally. The dreamer may not know where they are in the real world, yet they may inhabit a powerful inner scene full of people, places, motion, and emotion. This shows that consciousness can remain rich even while losing contact with shared external reality. Dream consciousness is usually less reflective than waking consciousness. Strange events may feel completely normal inside a dream because reality monitoring is weaker. The dreaming mind often accepts impossible situations without question. This is one of the clearest signs that self-reflection and vivid experience can come apart. Lucid dreaming shows that metacognition can partially return without full waking. A person can realize, within the dream, that the present experience is not part of ordinary waking life. This makes lucid dreaming especially valuable for science because it combines dream immersion with a degree of conscious insight into the state itself. Sleep research shows that consciousness can exist even when memory formation is weak. A person may have a vivid dream and still lose it almost immediately after waking. This separation between experience and later recall is a major lesson in consciousness science. Experiencing something and storing it reliably are related, but they are not the same process. Dreaming is often more emotional, more hallucinatory, and less reality-checked than waking thought. Yet, it is still a real form of consciousness. That matters because it broadens the scientific picture of awareness. Consciousness is not limited to one sober, orderly, externally guided form. It can also be imaginative, unstable, and inwardly generated. The sleeping brain shows something very important about consciousness. A person can have experience even when they are not well connected to the outside world. During sleep, sounds from the room, the position of the body, and the passage of real time may all become less central, while a vivid inner world takes over. This means consciousness is not just awareness of the external environment. It can also be a self-generated world created largely from within the brain itself. Some researchers use dream reports to study the smallest building blocks of conscious scenes. In dreams, scientists can ask whether a person had a body, a location, motion, color, emotion, speech, or a sense of narrative. Because dreams can preserve some features of waking awareness while removing others, they help researchers examine which parts of consciousness are more basic and which depend on contact with the outside world. The difference between dreaming and dreamless sleep is scientifically useful because it allows researchers to compare a state with reported experience to one that often appears much quieter or even blank. By comparing brain activity in these conditions, scientists can search for patterns that are more closely tied to the presence of experience itself, rather than just general sleep or general brain activity. Dreamless sleep may not always be completely empty of experience. Some people report subtle states with little imagery, little story, and little sense of space, yet still describe a faint form of awareness. This has become an important question in consciousness research because it suggests that experience may sometimes exist in very reduced forms that do not look anything like ordinary waking thought or vivid dreaming. Consciousness during sleep can vary in vividness, coherence, self-awareness, and memory. One sleeping experience may feel like a full dramatic world, while another may be little more than a passing thought, a feeling, or a fragment of presence. This tells us that consciousness is not one fixed package. Even within sleep, it can change in quality and richness. REM sleep and waking share some physiological similarities, which helps explain why REM dreams can feel so real. The dreamer may see movement, hear voices, and experience scenes with emotional force, even though the experience is internally generated. The sleeping brain in that state can create something that resembles waking awareness in surprising detail. Dream consciousness is usually more unstable than ordinary waking consciousness. Reality checking is weaker, time can behave strangely, and impossible events may be accepted without question. This shows that vivid experience alone is not enough for ordinary rational awareness. A person can be highly conscious in one sense, yet much less reflective or critical in another. Sleep shows that the brain can generate a model of a world without needing current sensory information from the real one. A dream can include places, people, movement, fear, conversation, and physical sensation, even when the sleeper is lying still in a dark room. This ability reveals how much of conscious experience depends on the brain's internal constructive power. In dreams, identity itself can become flexible. A person may feel like themselves, like a different version of themselves, or even seem to occupy a shifting role within the dream. Body boundaries may change, locations may jump, and ordinary rules may disappear. This shows that many features that feel stable in waking consciousness are actively maintained rather than guaranteed. That flexibility in dreaming reminds researchers that the normal waking self is not simply given. It is held together through ongoing brain processes that keep identity, body sense, and reality monitoring aligned. When those processes loosen, consciousness does not vanish. Instead, it may take on unusual and revealing forms. Some theories treat dreaming as a powerful natural model for studying consciousness because it preserves experience while stripping away much of normal sensory guidance. In waking life, the outside world constantly helps anchor awareness. In dreams, the brain must do far more of that work on its own. This makes dreams especially valuable for understanding the generative side of consciousness. Sleep research also shows that consciousness and memory are not identical. A dream can be rich, emotional, and detailed, yet vanish rapidly after waking. This means later recall is not a perfect measure of whether an experience occurred. A conscious event may be real and meaningful even if it leaves only a faint trace by morning. Consciousness during sleep can include pain, fear, speech, social interaction, and movement imagery, even though the sleeper is not actually moving through the world. This is another reminder that conscious life is not limited to what the body is outwardly doing. Experience can remain active and structured even in conditions of physical stillness. People awakened from REM sleep are much more likely to report dreams than people awakened from some other stages. This pattern helped establish REM as a major state of interest in consciousness research. It suggested that certain brain conditions are especially favorable for vivid internally generated awareness, even when the person is cut off from the external environment. Lucid dreaming shows that self-reflective awareness can return without full awakening. The dreamer may realize, in the middle of the dream, that the strange world around them is internally generated. This is remarkable because it shows that reflection and immersion can coexist. A person can still be inside the experience, while also understanding something about its nature. Ordinary dreaming usually lacks strong voluntary control, and that helps distinguish it from waking imagination. In waking imagination, you generally know you are imagining and can guide the scene more deliberately. In dreams, the scene often unfolds on its own, and the dreamer is carried along by it. This difference helps researchers study how control and awareness interact. The dreaming brain can build faces, places, and storylines by recombining pieces of memory without the person consciously choosing those combinations. This shows how much unconscious construction lies beneath conscious experience. Even when the dream feels immediate and whole, it may be assembled from fragments the dreamer never deliberately selected. The sleeping mind can therefore be conscious without being strongly rational, reality-checked, or behaviorally responsive. This matters because it broadens the scientific picture of awareness. Consciousness is not just sharp waking reason. It can also be immersive, emotional, internally driven, and disconnected from shared reality. One lesson from sleep is that consciousness does not require active outward engagement. A person can be lying still, unresponsive, and unaware of the real room around them, yet still be having vivid experiences. This has influenced research in many other areas, including anesthesia and disorders of consciousness, because it warns against assuming that silence means emptiness. Another lesson from sleep is that vivid experience can exist without strong self-reflection. A dream may be full of imagery and feeling, yet the dreamer may not pause to question any of it. This suggests that one layer of consciousness concerns what is being experienced, while another layer concerns awareness of being in that experience. Dream research has pushed scientists to reconsider states once described too simply as unconscious. If some people report subtle forms of awareness in conditions once assumed to be blank, then consciousness may not always disappear cleanly. It may fade into reduced or unusual forms that are easy to overlook if researchers rely only on coarse categories. Because of this, sleep has become one of the best natural laboratories for studying how consciousness changes without disappearing completely. It offers a wide range of states, from vivid dreams to faint awareness to apparent absence, all within the ordinary cycles of human life. This makes it an unusually rich source of clues about the structure of experience. General anesthesia became important to consciousness science because it allows awareness to be suppressed in a medically controlled and usually reversible way. That makes it different from injury or disease. Researchers can observe how consciousness fades, what remains, and how awareness returns, which provides a rare chance to study the edges of experience under controlled conditions. Different anesthetic drugs do not all suppress consciousness in the same way. Some may alter memory more strongly, some may affect responsiveness differently, and some may disrupt communication across brain networks more than others. This is important because it means anesthesia is not one single model of unconsciousness. It is a family of related but distinct altered states. Under anesthesia, some sensory processing may continue even when conscious awareness is absent or very weak. The brain may still register sounds or signals at certain levels, without those signals becoming part of lived experience. This helps show that processing and consciousness are not identical. A brain can react without a person being consciously present to the reaction. This distinction matters clinically because a person might show some internal processing during a medical procedure without forming an experience that is later remembered. It also matters scientifically because it reveals another split between consciousness and memory. The brain may encode, react, or prepare without producing the kind of stable awareness that becomes reportable later. Intraoperative awareness with explicit recall is rare, but it remains deeply important because it shows that consciousness can, in unusual cases, survive intended suppression. It is one of the clearest real-world reminders that awareness is not always easy to measure from the outside. Even in a highly controlled medical state, the boundary between awareness and non-awareness can be complex. In clinical practice, anesthesiologists often define consciousness in operational terms, such as connectedness, responsiveness, and report. This is not because those ideas solve the full philosophical mystery, but because medicine needs workable signs. In real settings, clinicians need to know whether the patient is aware of the environment, able to respond, or likely to remember. Anesthesia, sleep, and coma may all involve reduced responsiveness, but they are not the same condition. Sleep is a natural recurring process. Anesthesia is medically induced and controlled, and coma usually follows serious injury or illness. Each state teaches something different about consciousness, and confusing them would hide important differences in brain function and experience. Coma is defined by the absence of both wakefulness and awareness, with closed eyes and no arousable response. This makes it one of the most severe disruptions of consciousness. Yet even here, science must be careful, because transitions out of coma can be gradual, and different forms of residual processing may survive in ways that are not obvious at first glance. In the vegetative state, often also called unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, patients may show sleep-wake cycles and open their eyes, yet still show no clear signs of purposeful awareness. This condition was especially important historically because it forced scientists and clinicians to distinguish eye-opening from actual conscious engagement. The minimally conscious state is different because it involves inconsistent but definite signs of awareness. The patient may follow a command on some occasions, visually track a moving object, or show meaningful emotional response. These signs may be small and irregular, but they indicate that consciousness is present to some degree. A patient is often considered to have emerged from the minimally conscious state when they show reliable communication or functional use of objects. This matters because it marks a clearer return of organized conscious engagement with the world. The person is no longer showing only occasional fragments of awareness, but more dependable signs of purposeful interaction. These distinctions between coma, vegetative state, and minimally conscious state matter greatly in medicine. They influence prognosis, rehabilitation, communication strategies, family understanding, and ethical decisions. Consciousness science is therefore not only theoretical, it affects real lives, real care, and the way serious brain injury is understood. Misdiagnosis has historically been common in disorders of consciousness because behavior alone can underestimate hidden awareness. A patient may understand language or preserve some inner experience while being unable to show it clearly with movement. This is why careful, repeated, and standardized assessment is so important. Some non-responsive patients show brain evidence of command following when asked to imagine actions, such as playing tennis or walking through a house. Even if they cannot move, their brain activity may shift in meaningful ways that match the instruction. This has become one of the most striking discoveries in modern consciousness research. This pattern is sometimes called cognitive motor dissociation because the mind may still follow commands, even when the body cannot express that understanding. It reveals a painful but important possibility. A patient may retain awareness and intention while lacking the motor ability to show them in ordinary bedside examination. Because of cases like this, brain-based testing has become increasingly important for patients who cannot communicate normally. EEG, imaging, stimulation, and carefully designed tasks can sometimes reveal preserved awareness that would otherwise be missed. These methods are not perfect, but they offer a way to look beyond silence and stillness. The Coma Recovery Scale Revised became widely used because structured examination is much better than casual impression. Small signs of awareness can be easy to miss if the assessment is hurried or unstandardized. A careful scale helps clinicians distinguish reflexes from purposeful responses and track change over time. Locked-in syndrome can look like unconsciousness because the person may be almost completely paralyzed and unable to speak, yet consciousness is often preserved. This is one of the clearest examples of why movement cannot be taken as a simple measure of awareness. The mind may remain alert behind a nearly motionless body. In classic locked-in syndrome, vertical eye movements and blinking may remain available as channels of communication. That tiny preserved motor pathway can become the bridge between an intact conscious mind and the outside world. It is a powerful example of how fragile the expression of consciousness can be. Locked-in syndrome is usually caused by damage to the brainstem rather than widespread destruction of the cortex. This means many of the systems supporting awareness may remain largely intact, while the pathways for movement are devastated. Scientifically, it helps separate consciousness from its outward expression in a very dramatic way. For that reason, locked-in syndrome is not classified as a disorder of consciousness in the same sense as coma or vegetative state. The person is generally conscious, even though they may seem unreachable at first. The central problem is not lack of awareness, but lack of motor output. Brain complexity measures are especially useful in coma research because they do not rely only on speech or visible action. They aim to estimate how richly and broadly the brain responds, which may offer clues about whether consciousness is still possible or present. This approach grew partly from the recognition that behavior can be misleading. The Perturbational Complexity Index has shown promise in separating many conscious from unconscious conditions, including some cases where overt behavior is limited. By stimulating the brain and studying how complex the response becomes, researchers try to estimate whether the brain still supports the kind of integrated dynamics associated with awareness. Recovery from severe disorders of consciousness is often gradual rather than sudden. A patient may first show tiny, uncertain signs, then more organized responses, and only later recover reliable communication. This gradual return reminds us that consciousness can rebuild in layers, not just switch on all at once. Sleep-like and wake-like brain patterns can reappear during recovery after coma. These changing rhythms may reflect the slow return of large-scale coordination and arousal. Recovery is not simply a matter of one region becoming active again. It often involves the rebuilding of broader patterns that support organized awareness. Disorders of consciousness can follow traumatic injury, lack of oxygen, stroke, infection, and other forms of widespread brain insult. The causes vary, but the result can be a serious disruption in the systems that support wakefulness, integration, and conscious content. This variety also helps explain why outcomes can differ so much from one patient to another. Loss of consciousness after injury can happen either because arousal systems are directly damaged or because communication across widespread cortical systems breaks down. In some cases, the brain cannot properly wake. In others, wakefulness may return, but organized awareness does not. This separation has been central to modern clinical understanding. Consciousness assessment today is increasingly multimodal. Instead of relying on a single sign, clinicians may combine behavior, EEG, imaging, and sometimes brain stimulation. This richer approach reflects a major lesson of the field. Awareness is too complex to judge confidently from only one kind of evidence. A patient who appears still or unresponsive may still have fluctuating inner experience, including dreamlike states, wandering thought, or fragments of awareness. This possibility matters deeply. It means that the absence of clear, purposeful movement does not prove the absence of a conscious life. Sometimes the mind is present in ways the body cannot show. The brain often begins to classify a stimulus and prepare a response before a person becomes fully aware of it. This means consciousness is not the very first stage of mental processing. Much of the work starts quietly in the background, and only later does some portion rise into awareness. By the time you clearly notice something, the brain may already have begun deciding what it is and what to do about it. Conscious attention can strengthen weak or ambiguous signals, making them more likely to enter awareness. If a sound is faint, a shape is hard to see, or a sensation is uncertain, attention can help stabilize it. In this way, attention acts less like consciousness itself and more like a support system that increases the chance that a fragile signal becomes part of experience. Yet, not everything that receives attention becomes conscious. A person may direct mental resources towards something without fully experiencing it in a reportable way. This is one of the strongest reasons scientists separate attention from awareness. The two are closely linked, but they are not identical, and studying their difference has become one of the key tasks of consciousness research. Some experiments suggest that information can shape later behavior even when people say they never consciously saw it. A person may deny seeing a stimulus, yet still be influenced by it in a later choice or response. This reveals that unconscious processing can be surprisingly capable. It can guide behavior in subtle ways without becoming part of the person's felt inner experience. The same stimulus can be represented differently by the brain depending on whether it reaches awareness. In one case, it may remain a weak, local signal that helps with a simple response. In another, it may become a stable, widely available content that can be remembered, described, or compared. This difference helps researchers ask what changes when processing becomes conscious rather than merely effective. Consciousness research often depends on very careful contrasts, such as seen versus unseen, remembered versus forgotten, or reported versus unreported. These comparisons are useful because they allow researchers to hold many things constant while changing only one key factor. By comparing nearby conditions, scientists can better isolate what seems most tied to awareness itself. Because report can change the very brain processes being measured, some researchers use what are called no-report methods. Instead of asking a person to press a button or speak, they look for signs of awareness in physiology, eye behavior, brain rhythms, or task performance. The goal is to reduce the risk that the act of reporting becomes confused with consciousness itself. This issue matters because report is never a neutral window. To report an experience, a person must notice it, hold it in mind, translate it into action, and often prepare language or movement. Each of those steps adds extra brain activity. So, in some experiments, the challenge is not just to detect awareness, but to separate it from everything required to describe awareness. Working memory often overlaps with consciousness because both involve keeping information active and available. When something is consciously present in the mind, it is often also being maintained in a form that can be used. But the overlap is not perfect. Some researchers think certain forms of working memory may operate with less conscious experience than people once assumed. Confidence judgments are useful because they reveal not only what a person says they perceived, but how certain they feel about it. A person may be unsure, partly aware, or just above guessing. That extra layer of reporting helps researchers study metacognition, which is the mind's ability to evaluate its own states rather than simply have them. Metacognition adds a reflective layer to consciousness. It allows a person not only to see, hear, or remember, but also to know that they are seeing, hearing, or remembering. This second-level awareness is important in daily life because it helps with error checking, decision-making, learning, and self-correction. It turns experience into something that can also be monitored. This reflective layer helps explain why human consciousness often includes awareness of awareness. A person can notice that they are confused, doubtful, focused, distracted, or emotionally moved. That extra level of insight is not always present equally, but when it appears, it gives consciousness a more self-observing quality. Reassessing one's own confidence can improve metacognitive performance. In other words, people can sometimes become better at judging what they know and what they do not know. This suggests that reflective awareness is not simply fixed. It can shift, sharpen, and in some cases improve with training or careful feedback. Blindsight became so important because it revealed a split between visual processing and visual awareness. In this condition, some people with damage to certain visual areas can still guess location or motion better than chance, even though they insist they saw nothing. The brain is still doing visual work, but the person lacks ordinary visual experience of it. In some cases of blind sight, patients can detect movement or position above chance, while remaining sincerely convinced that no visual scene was present. This makes blind sight one of the clearest examples of mental processing without normal conscious access. It shows that seeing in the full subjective sense is not the same as merely registering useful visual information. There is still debate over whether blind sight is fully unconscious or whether it involves an extremely weak and degraded form of conscious vision. This debate matters because it highlights how hard it can be to define the border of awareness. Some experiences may be so faint, partial, or unusual that they do not fit neatly into simple categories. Hemispatial neglect offers another powerful example of dissociation. A person with neglect may ignore one side of space even though their basic sensory pathways are still functioning. It is not that the missing side has vanished physically. Instead, awareness and attention are no longer organizing space in the usual balanced way. Neglect shows that consciousness of space depends on more than sensation alone. You can have incoming information and still fail to include it properly in awareness. This reveals how much conscious experience depends on attentional organization. The world we feel ourselves living in is shaped not only by what enters the senses, but by how the mind arranges it. Patients with neglect may eat from only one side of a plate or read only one side of a page. These behaviors are striking because they show how consciousness can become spatially uneven. The world does not disappear entirely. Instead, awareness becomes lopsided, as though one region of space has lost its normal place within experience. Some brain disorders also impair awareness of one's own deficits, a condition known as anosognosia. A person may deny paralysis, deny illness, or fail to grasp a very obvious loss of function. This is not simple stubbornness. It reflects a breakdown in the brain's ability to update the self-model accurately. Anosognosia shows that self-awareness is not automatic. It depends on specific brain systems being able to compare the body, the world, and the self in a reliable way. When that updating process is disrupted, a person may sincerely fail to recognize something that seems completely obvious to everyone around them. Much of what reaches awareness has already been shaped by unconscious processing stages. Before you consciously recognize an object, sound, or touch, the brain has often already sorted, filtered, and partly interpreted it. Consciousness therefore receives information that has already been prepared in important ways by earlier, unseen processes. The brain often begins preparing actions before the person becomes fully conscious of the relevant stimulus. This means conscious awareness may arrive after some parts of perception and response are already underway. The mind is not a slow afterthought, but neither is it always the first point of contact with incoming information. The sense of body ownership and the sense of agency are related but not identical. You may feel that a body part belongs to you without necessarily feeling that you caused every movement associated with it. These two dimensions are usually tightly linked in daily life, but experiments and disorders show they can come apart. The rubber hand illusion mainly alters ownership rather than full personal identity. A fake hand can begin to feel like part of the body when the signals are arranged in the right way. But this does not mean the whole self transfers into the rubber hand. Instead, it reveals something more specific. Body ownership is built from coordinated evidence and can be experimentally shifted. Out-of-body experiences mainly disturb self-location and perspective. A person may feel as though they are located somewhere else in space or viewing themselves from outside the body. This tells researchers that the sense of where I am is not a fixed metaphysical certainty. It is something the brain continuously constructs. These dissociations show that the self is not one single solid feeling. It includes ownership, agency, perspective, location, continuity, and autobiographical identity. all of which can be affected in different ways. The ordinary feeling of being one stable self is real, but it is built from several pieces working together. The temporoparietal junction has become especially important in research on bodily self-consciousness. It appears to help combine signals about the body, position in space, and point of view. When activity in this region changes in unusual ways, experiences of body ownership and self-location can shift dramatically. The default mode network is especially important in research on autobiographical selfhood. It is often active during remembering, future thinking, reflection, and internally generated thought. This makes it central to the sense of being a person extended through time, not just a body in the present moment. Interoception is especially important in research on the feeling self because it concerns the sensing of the body from within. Heartbeat, breathing, fullness, discomfort, warmth, and visceral tension all contribute to how a person feels themselves to be alive. Selfhood is therefore not only a story or a viewpoint. It is also a bodily condition felt from the inside. Conscious selfhood depends on combining body signals, memory, perception, and social understanding. The self is not built from one ingredient alone. It arises from the meeting of what the body feels, what the world shows, what the past provides, and what other minds seem to expect or reflect back. Cultural learning can shape metacognition and conscious interpretation. People do not only inherit brains. They also inherit languages, habits of attention, styles of self-description, and shared ways of interpreting inner life. This means consciousness is deeply biological, but also partly shaped by social and cultural training. Because of this, consciousness is influenced not only by neural mechanisms, but also by language, education, practice, and social norms. The ways people describe pain, identity, attention, memory, and selfhood can shape how those things are noticed and understood in experience. Mind wandering is often less meta-aware than focused reflection because people usually notice it only after it has already begun. The mind drifts first, and awareness of the drifting comes later. This makes mind wandering the useful case for studying how consciousness can contain thought without strongly observing itself. Mindfulness practices often aim to increase meta-awareness, especially awareness of wandering attention. Rather than stopping all thought, many such practices train a person to notice when the mind has moved away from the present task or sensation. This makes mindfulness valuable in research on how awareness can become more reflective and stable. The contrast between mind wandering and mindfulness helps reveal different modes of conscious regulation. In one case, thoughts move on their own and observation is weak. In the other, attention is steadier and the person is more aware of where the mind is going. These differences show that consciousness has styles as well as contents. The sense of self can loosen in some meditation practices. A person may feel less bounded, less fixed, or less centered in the usual way. This is important because it shows that ordinary self-consciousness, though familiar and powerful, is not immovable. It can be reshaped by changes in attention and bodily awareness. Reports of reduced self-boundaries in meditation have been linked to changes in activity in parts of the posterior medial cortex. Findings like this suggest that even subtle shifts in how the self is consciously represented may have measurable neural correlates. The feeling of me is deeply real, but it is also biologically supported and modifiable. Consciousness usually feels unified, but self-related components can come apart under illness, experiment, or altered state. A person may feel located differently, less in control, less identified with thoughts, or less anchored in autobiographical narrative. These cases help scientists see the fine structure hidden inside the ordinary sense of self. Time consciousness is central to identity because continuity of self depends on more than isolated moments. To feel like the same person, a mind must link present awareness to remembered past and anticipated future. Without that temporal stitching, the personal self would become much more fragile and fragmented. Autobiographical memory helps maintain this continuity by connecting present awareness with a personally experienced past. It gives the self thickness and duration. Without memory, consciousness might still exist in the present, but the long arc of identity would be weakened. Future planning also contributes to self-consciousness because it projects the present self into imagined situations that have not yet happened. A person does not only remember who they were, they also rehearse who they may become, what they must avoid, and what they hope to do. This future-directed quality is a major part of human consciousness. Social cognition matters because much of self-awareness develops in relation to other people. Human beings learn about themselves partly through being seen, judged, mirrored, corrected, and understood by others. This means the conscious self is not built in isolation. It grows within a social world. Even the feeling of being located behind the eyes and inside the body appears to be a constructed feature of consciousness. It feels natural and obvious, but certain illusions and brain disturbances can shift it. This suggests that first-person perspective, though deeply familiar, is still something the brain actively creates. Bodily illusions show that self-placement can move when the brain is given carefully arranged conflicting signals. Under the right conditions, the mind can relocate where it feels the self is centered. This reveals how flexible and dynamic spatial selfhood can be beneath its ordinary stability. Distortions of agency show that feeling in control often depends on predictions about the outcomes of action. When the expected effect follows in the expected way, agency feels strong. When prediction and outcome become mismatched, the feeling of control can weaken or shift. Agency is therefore not just raw will. It is also informed interpretation. Conscious awareness of emotion is tied partly to how well bodily changes are detected and interpreted. A heartbeat, a tightening chest, a change in breathing, or a rising warmth may become part of the conscious feeling of fear, sadness, or excitement. Emotion is not simply thought plus sensation. It is a structured interpretation of bodily and situational change. This is why interoception is now discussed so often in studies of emotion, selfhood, and psychiatric symptoms. The body does not merely support consciousness from below. It helps shape its feeling tone from moment to moment. The way inner bodily signals are processed can influence how a person feels, who they take themselves to be, and how clearly they understand their own state. The study of self-consciousness has shown that the ordinary sense of I is stable in everyday life, yet highly constructed beneath the surface. It feels simple because the brain normally coordinates many signals so smoothly. But when those signals are disturbed, the hidden structure of selfhood becomes visible, and consciousness reveals just how finely built it really is. Evidence from developmental neuroscience increasingly suggests that newborns are not empty reflex machines. Even at the beginning of life, there are signs that human infants may possess some form of conscious experience. Researchers are careful here, because babies cannot describe what they feel, but the growing view is that the newborn mind is not simply dark and mechanical. It may already contain sensation, feeling, and early forms of awareness. Many scientists think infant consciousness does not appear all at once in one dramatic moment. Instead, it likely develops gradually, with different abilities and forms of awareness becoming stronger over time. This gradual view fits what is known about brain development more broadly. Rather than switching on like a light, consciousness in early life may begin in simple forms and become richer, more organized, and more flexible as the brain matures. Newborns appear able to recognize important features of their mother, including aspects of her voice, smell, and expression. This matters because it suggests that even very early in life, the infant brain is already organizing experience in meaningful ways. The world is not just raw noise. Certain patterns stand out, and some of them carry emotional and biological importance from the start. Birth itself brings a massive change in sensory experience. Before birth, the environment is muted, warm, enclosed, and filtered. After birth, there is light, air, sound, touch, gravity, and direct contact with the world in a new way. Some researchers think this dramatic transition may help support the newborn's waking state and early conscious engagement with the outside world. Because infants cannot explain what they experience, scientists look for other markers of awareness. They study orienting behavior, learning, multisensory integration, and patterns of brain activity. The goal is to ask whether the infant mind shows signs of organizing experience in flexible and meaningful ways, even in the absence of language and deliberate report. Infant consciousness research is difficult, partly because many standard adult tests rely on language, instruction, or deliberate response. A baby cannot press a button to say what it saw or describe what it felt. This means researchers must build indirect methods that are sensitive enough to detect awareness without asking for adult-style performance. Interest in animal consciousness has grown strongly because more and more evidence suggests that awareness may not be limited to humans. Researchers now take seriously the possibility that many other creatures have subjective experiences of their own. The scientific question is no longer treated as strange or unnecessary in the way it often was in the past. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness argued that humans are not unique in having the neural substrates that support consciousness. This was an important public statement because it reflected a growing scientific view that conscious experience is likely not exclusive to our species. It helped push the field toward a broader and more comparative outlook. The New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness went further by stating that there is strong scientific support for conscious experience in other mammals and in birds. This reflects a cautious but important shift. Scientists are becoming more willing to say that evidence is strong enough in some groups that consciousness should be taken seriously as a real possibility, not merely as speculation. That same declaration also stated that there is a realistic possibility of conscious experience in at least some reptiles, fish, and invertebrates. This matters because it widens the scope of the conversation beyond the animals most similar to us. Consciousness research is becoming less centered only on human likeness and more focused on evidence from behavior, nervous systems, and flexible response. Octopuses are often discussed in this area because they show complex behavior and a very unusual nervous organization compared with vertebrates. They solve problems, explore actively, and interact with the world in sophisticated ways. The scientists there are especially interesting because they raise the possibility that advanced forms of experience may evolve along very different biological paths. Animal consciousness research increasingly avoids asking only a simple yes or no question. Instead of asking merely whether a species is conscious, researchers now ask what kinds or dimensions of consciousness it may have. This is a more useful approach because awareness may differ in structure, richness, and function across species, rather than existing as one all-or-nothing condition. Those dimensions may include perceptual richness, pain experience, emotional states, temporal integration, and self-related capacities. A species may have one set of conscious strengths and not another. This approach gives a more careful and realistic picture of minds in nature, instead of forcing every organism into a single human-centered model. Comparative research matters ethically because the capacity for conscious experience is deeply tied to the capacity to suffer, to enjoy, to fear, and to benefit. If another creature has subjective experience, then what happens to it matters in a morally serious way. Consciousness research, therefore, has ethical importance far beyond theory alone. Altered states produced by psychedelics have become important in consciousness science because they can change perception, meaning, emotion, self-boundaries, and the general organization of experience. These states are valuable not because they are ordinary, but because they reveal how awareness behaves when familiar mental structures loosen or reorganize. Classical psychedelics often disrupt the usual connectivity patterns of the default mode network, while increasing communication across networks that are normally more separated. This change may help explain why people in these states often report unusual associations, shifts in self-experience, and blending between thoughts, sensations, and meanings that are usually kept more distinct. These changes are often linked to altered self-experience, including a reduction in the ordinary sense of ego boundaries. A person may feel less sharply separated from the environment, less centered in a familiar personal story, or less confined by the usual sense of self. This does not mean the self vanishes in every case, but its normal structure may become more flexible. Some psychedelic theories suggest that increased brain entropy is related to a greater diversity of conscious content. In simple terms, brain activity may become less rigid and more variable, and experience may become more fluid, surprising, and wide-ranging. This is one attempt to explain why psychedelic states can feel more expansive or less constrained than ordinary waking life. Psychedelics are also being discussed as possible tools for studying or perhaps modulating consciousness in severe brain injury. This idea is still highly experimental, but it shows how far the field is willing to think beyond older categories. If certain substances affect integration, selfhood, or network dynamics, researchers naturally wonder whether that knowledge could someday have technical value. That possibility remains controversial. There is still much uncertainty about safety, mechanism, usefulness, and interpretation. Consciousness science often reaches its limits in these areas, because unusual states can be rich in reports yet difficult to explain cleanly. Caution remains essential. Meditation is another major altered state domain, but unlike psychedelics, it changes consciousness without drugs. It can influence attention, self-processing, bodily awareness, and emotional tone through training and practice. That makes it especially valuable for researchers interested in how the mind can reshape itself through repeated mental habits. Different styles of meditation recruit different modes of consciousness. Some practices emphasize focused attention on a single object, such as the breath. Others emphasize open monitoring, where a person notices thoughts, sensations, and feelings without attaching strongly to them. These differences matter because they show that meditation is not one single mental state. Studies of experienced meditators report changes in brain rhythms and network organization during practice. These findings suggest that trained attention and altered self-awareness are not just subjective impressions. They may also be reflected in measurable shifts in how the brain coordinates activity across different regions. Some reviews suggest that certain meditative states may show higher neural complexity than ordinary waking rest or wandering thought. This is interesting because it challenges the idea that calmness means mental emptiness. A quiet state of mind may still be richly organized, even if it feels simple and steady from within. Long-term meditation practice has also been associated with structural differences in parts of the brain, linked to attention, interoception, and self-related processing. While these findings must be interpreted carefully, they suggest that repeated conscious practice may leave lasting marks on the systems that help shape awareness. Mindfulness training is often associated with improved emotional regulation and changed pain processing. A person may still feel discomfort or emotion, but the way it is experienced, interpreted, and responded to may change. This makes mindfulness useful in consciousness research because it shows that the style of awareness can influence the quality of experience. Consciousness studies increasingly treat interoception, meditation, and selfhood as connected topics. This makes sense because many contemplative practices involve attending closely to breathing, bodily feeling, and the shifting sense of self. The body, attention, and identity are not separate subjects here. They meet inside lived awareness. One reason for this connection is that many contemplative traditions explicitly train awareness of breathing, heartbeat, posture, and other bodily signals. These are not treated as background noise. They become anchors of attention and windows into the structure of experience itself. That makes them highly relevant for modern scientific study. This trained interoceptive attention can alter how the self is consciously represented. When a person becomes more aware of subtle bodily states, the ordinary boundaries between thought, body, and emotion may feel different. The self may appear less solid, more process-like, or more directly tied to the living body. Consciousness is highly relevant to psychiatry because several mental illnesses involve altered self-experience, agency, reflection, or awareness of thought. These are not just disorders of mood or behavior. In many cases, they are also disorders of how the person experiences themselves and the world from within. Schizophrenia research often focuses on disturbances in agency, ownership, and meta-awareness. A person may feel that thoughts are not fully their own, or that actions are not properly self-caused, or that internal events are being misidentified. These symptoms reveal how much ordinary conscious life depends on stable self-modeling. Conscious pain is not simply a raw signal arriving from the body. It is shaped by attention, expectation, memory, context, and prior learning. Two people can receive similar sensory input and still experience pain very differently. This makes pain one of the clearest examples of consciousness as an active construction. That is why pain is such a useful subject for consciousness science. It shows that what we feel is not always a direct copy of what is happening in tissue. The brain interprets, predicts, and weighs significance, and the conscious result is shaped by all of that processing. Pain is real, but it is not passive. Emotions are similarly constructed from bodily signals, appraisals, context, memory, and interpretation. Fear, joy, shame, anger, and sadness are not just raw forces appearing from nowhere. They emerge from the interaction of body and meaning. Conscious feeling is therefore deeply tied to how the mind understands what the body is undergoing. Research on consciousness increasingly emphasizes that feeling, perception, selfhood, and cognition are intertwined. They are not separate rooms in the mind. A bodily signal can affect thought, a memory can alter pain, an expectation can shape perception, and a sense of self can change emotion. Conscious life is woven from these interacting strands. The field now pays more attention to covert awareness because lack of movement or speech does not guarantee lack of experience. This shift has been one of the most humane and important changes in recent research. It reminds scientists and clinicians to be careful before assuming that silence means absence. The field also pays more attention to pre-linguistic and non-human minds because report-based methods alone leave out many possible conscious beings. If science only studies minds that can speak clearly, it will miss infants, many patients, and most animals. A fuller science of consciousness must therefore work with indirect but meaningful evidence. Consciousness science has become increasingly comparative. Researchers now ask how awareness differs across species, developmental stages, altered states, and clinical conditions. This broader approach helps reveal which features are widespread, which are specialized, and which may be more fundamental than they first appeared. Despite all this progress, there is still no single universally accepted test that proves consciousness in every possible case. This is one of the deepest challenges in the field. Awareness must often be inferred from multiple kinds of evidence, and no one tool settles every question. Instead, researchers rely on converging evidence. They combine behavior, brain complexity, connectivity, physiology, and report when possible. The idea is not that one measure is perfect, but that several lines of evidence together can create a more reliable picture of whether consciousness is likely present and in what form. Because of this, consciousness is increasingly studied less as a single switch and more as a family of related capacities and experiences. Awareness may include vividness, access, selfhood, connectedness, reflection, and memory, and different states may alter these in different combinations. This richer view better matches what real cases reveal. Some conditions mainly alter vividness. Others alter access to information, the sense of self, memory formation, or connectedness to the outside world. This diversity matters because it shows why simple statements about consciousness are often misleading. Different states do not all fail or succeed in the same way. That is one reason slogans about consciousness usually fall short. The subject sounds simple in ordinary life because everyone knows what it is like to be aware. But once science begins comparing sleep, injury, meditation, pain, animals, and altered states, the structure becomes far more complicated than everyday language suggests. The field has often made the most progress when it studies nearby contrasts instead of treating consciousness only as a giant, abstract mystery. Comparing wakefulness with dreaming, anesthesia with recovery, or one kind of report with another often reveals more than trying to solve everything in one leap. Careful contrasts have become one of the great strengths of the science. Sleep, anesthesia, brain injury, psychedelics, meditation, and illusion experiments each reveal a different side of the puzzle. No single domain explains all of consciousness, but each one removes or alters a piece of ordinary awareness and lets scientists study what happens when that piece shifts. The ordinary waking state feels natural and complete, yet research shows that it is only one mode among many possible configurations of experience. Consciousness can become narrower, more internally generated, more fragmented, less self-focused, more vivid, or less connected. The waking state is familiar, but it is not the only way experience can be organized. Much of what feels stable about consciousness depends on continuous integration of body signals, sensory input, memory, and prediction. The mind feels smooth and coherent because these processes usually work together extremely well. When they do, awareness seems simple. When they do not, the hidden complexity becomes visible. When those integrations are altered, the world can still appear, but differently. Experience may become narrower, stranger, more vivid, less owned, less controlled, or less connected to shared reality. The content of consciousness may remain, yet its structure can shift in profound ways. This is one of the most important lessons the field has learned. One of the strongest modern lessons is that consciousness is real, variable, and biologically grounded, yet far more complex than everyday intuition suggests. It is not a magical add-on, but neither is it a simple mechanical output. It is a structured feature of living minds that can take many forms. For all the progress in measuring, comparing, and modeling consciousness, it remains one of the rare subjects where objective science and subjective life meet directly but never fully merge. Science can approach it from the outside with increasing precision. But consciousness is also what life feels like from within, and that inner side always remains part of the mystery. Consciousness research has shown more and more clearly that even the earliest human life may include some form of experience. Newborns are not generally understood as empty bodies running on reflex alone. Their brains already respond to important patterns, and many researchers think there is good reason to believe that some simple kind of awareness is present very early. It may not be reflective, verbal, or organized like adult consciousness, but it may still be real. Many scientists think early consciousness develops gradually rather than appearing all at once. This idea fits well with how the brain itself develops, through layers of growth, connection, and increasing coordination. Rather than imagining one magical moment when awareness begins fully formed, researchers often picture a slow deepening, where simple forms of experience may come first and richer forms arrive later. Newborns seem able to recognize important features of the people closest to them, especially the mother's voice, smell, and certain visual patterns. This is meaningful because it suggests that the infant mind is already organizing the world in a selective and sensitive way. Even at that early stage, not everything is equal. Some signals already matter more than others, and that points toward the presence of a structured inner life. Birth brings a dramatic transformation in sensory experience. Before birth, the environment is dim, filtered, and enclosed. After birth, there is light, open air, touch on the skin, changing temperature, and direct sound. This huge shift may help support the newborn's transition into a more wakeful and outwardly engaged state, and it reminds us that consciousness grows in partnership with the world the body enters. Because infants cannot speak about what they experience, scientists rely on careful, indirect signs. They study patterns of looking, learning, orientation, brain activity, and the ability to combine information from different senses. These tools do not give a perfect answer, but they help build a picture of whether the infant mind is responding in a flexible and meaningful way rather than merely reacting automatically. This makes infant consciousness one of the most delicate topics in the field. Researchers must avoid saying too much, yet also avoid saying too little. The inability to report does not mean the absence of awareness. It simply means that science must learn to recognize consciousness in forms that do not yet come with language, explanation, or deliberate self-description. The same lesson appears in the study of animal consciousness. Interest in this subject has grown because more evidence now suggests that humans are not the only beings with subjective experience. Many animals show flexible behavior, learning, preference, emotion-like responses, and signs of pain or perception that are difficult to explain if inner experience is dismissed entirely. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness became important because it publicly reflected a growing scientific view that humans are not unique in having the neural foundations associated with conscious states. This did not mean every animal mind is the same as a human one. It meant that the old assumption of human exclusivity had become much harder to defend. The New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness added to that shift by stating that there is strong scientific support for conscious experience in other mammals and in birds. That matters because it shows increasing confidence within the scientific community. In some groups, the evidence is no longer treated as a remote possibility, but as something serious enough to influence both research and ethics. The declaration also stated that there is a realistic possibility of conscious experience in at least some reptiles, fish, and invertebrates. This widens the conversation in a profound way. It asks us to think about minds very different from our own, and to consider that experience may exist in forms that do not resemble human thought on the surface, yet are still meaningful from the inside. Octopuses are especially fascinating in this discussion because they combine complex behavior with a nervous system very different from that of vertebrates. Their problem-solving, exploration, and flexibility suggest that rich forms of processing can emerge in more than one biological design. For consciousness research, this is a quiet reminder that inner life may not require a single familiar blueprint. Because of this, modern animal consciousness research increasingly asks not just whether a species is conscious, but what kind of consciousness it may have. One species may have rich sensory awareness, another strong pain experience, another complex social perception. This is a gentler and more realistic approach because it allows minds to differ without forcing them all into one human-shaped mold. These dimensions can include how richly a creature perceives, whether it experiences pain, whether it integrates events across time, whether it has emotional states, and whether it holds any kind of self-related perspective. Consciousness may not be one indivisible package. It may come in different arrangements, with different strengths in different kinds of beings. That matters ethically because consciousness is closely tied to the ability to suffer, enjoy, fear, prefer, and be affected by what happens. Once a being may have experience, it becomes harder to treat it as though only physical function matters. Consciousness science therefore reaches naturally into moral life, asking not only what minds are, but how they should be regarded. Psychedelic states have become important in consciousness science because they can change perception, emotion, meaning, and self-experience in ways that are both dramatic and measurable. These states are useful not because they represent ordinary life, but because they loosen familiar mental structures and reveal how flexible awareness can become when its usual organization changes. Classical psychedelics often alter the usual communication patterns among major brain networks. Some networks become less tightly separated, and information may flow in less familiar ways. This may help explain why people in such states often describe unusual connections, symbolic meanings, or a blending of thought, sensation, and feeling that does not normally happen so strongly. One commonly discussed feature of these states is a softening of ordinary ego boundaries. A person may feel less enclosed within their usual personal story, less sharply divided from surroundings, or less fixed as a separate observer. These reports matter because they show that the normal sense of self, though deeply familiar, is not immovable. It can shift under changes in brain and body state. Some theories describe psychedelic states as involving greater diversity or flexibility in neural activity. In simple terms, the brain may become less constrained by its usual habits, and consciousness may become less predictable in what it presents. This does not automatically make the state clearer or wiser, but it does show that awareness can become more fluid and less rigidly organized. Researchers have even wondered whether such states, or insights from them, might someday help in understanding or modulating consciousness in severe brain injury. This remains highly experimental and uncertain, but the fact that the idea is being explored shows how much consciousness science now moves between laboratory theory, clinical hope, and careful caution. That caution is essential. Unusual conscious states can be vivid and meaningful, yet also difficult to interpret cleanly. A striking experience does not always reveal a simple truth about the mind. In consciousness research, powerful inner reports are valuable, but they must still be studied with patience and restraint. Meditation offers another route into altered consciousness, but unlike psychedelics, it works through practice rather than substances. It can change how attention is held, how bodily sensation is felt, how thoughts are observed, and how the self is experienced. That makes it especially interesting because it shows that repeated training can quietly reshape the style of awareness itself. Different forms of meditation cultivate different mental modes. Some narrow attention gently onto one object, such as the breath. Others allow a wider noticing of thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they come and go. These differences matter because they reveal that consciousness can be guided into distinct patterns, each with its own rhythm, tone, and structure. Studies of experienced meditators often report shifts in brain rhythms and network coordination during practice. These findings suggest that deliberate changes in awareness are not merely poetic descriptions. They can have measurable correlates in the living brain, which helps bridge first-person experience and scientific observation. Some reviews suggest that certain meditative states may show greater neural complexity than quiet, ordinary rest. This is a beautiful reminder that calm does not necessarily mean emptiness. A peaceful mind may still be richly organized, responsive, and finely balanced. Silence in experience is not the same as absence of activity. Long-term meditation practice has also been associated with differences in regions linked to attention, bodily sensing, and self-related processing. These findings are interpreted carefully, but they support an important idea. How we repeatedly use consciousness may slowly shape the systems that support consciousness itself. Mindfulness practices are often associated with changes in emotional regulation and pain experience. The feeling may still arise, but the relationship to it can change. A person may notice more clearly, react less automatically, and allow experience to unfold without being immediately pulled into it. This makes mindfulness a valuable model for how consciousness can become gentler without becoming blank. For this reason, consciousness studies increasingly connect meditation, interoception, and selfhood. Many contemplative practices train careful awareness of breathing, heartbeat, posture, and internal feeling. These are not treated as background details. They become central to understanding what it feels like to be a living self. This trained attention to the body can shift how the self is experienced. When breathing, pulse, pressure, and emotion are noticed more directly, the boundary between thought and body may feel less rigid. The self may seem less like a fixed object and more like an ongoing process arising within a living organism. Consciousness is also central to psychiatry because some disorders deeply affect how a person experiences selfhood, thought, agency, and inner certainty. Mental illness is not only about outward symptoms. It can involve changes in how experience itself is structured, including how real the world feels, how owned thoughts seem, or how stable identity becomes. Schizophrenia research often focuses on disturbances in agency, ownership, and meta-awareness for this reason. Some experiences may feel inserted, alien, or not fully self-caused. These symptoms are especially important in consciousness science because they show how much ordinary mental life depends on a steady sense that thoughts and actions belong to the same continuing self. Pain is one of the clearest examples of how consciousness is shaped, not merely received. Pain is real, but it is not a pure direct copy of tissue damage. Attention, expectation, fear, memory, and context all help determine how pain is consciously felt. This makes pain a powerful reminder that experience is active, interpretive, and deeply connected to meaning. That is also why pain has become such a useful subject for studying consciousness. It reveals the meeting point of body and mind with unusual clarity. A signal from the body matters, but the way it is experienced depends on how the brain understands it, predicts it, and places it within the larger situation. Emotions work in a similar way. They are not simply raw bursts appearing from nowhere. They emerge from bodily changes, learned meaning, past experience, present interpretation, and expectation. Conscious feeling is therefore not separate from the body, nor from thought. It forms at their meeting point. This growing emphasis on the intertwining of feeling, perception, selfhood, and cognition is one of the field's most important developments. It suggests that consciousness should not be divided too neatly into separate boxes. The way something is seen may change how it is felt. The way something is remembered may change how it is perceived. Conscious life is a woven whole. Modern research also pays much more attention to covert awareness. This is one of the gentlest and most important shifts in the field. Scientists and clinicians have become more careful about assuming that a still or silent person lacks inner life. In many cases, the body may fail to show what the mind still contains. The same caution now extends to prelinguistic and non-human minds. If science depended only on clear verbal report, it would ignore infants, many patients, and nearly all animals. A fuller study of consciousness must therefore learn to work with indirect evidence while remaining humble about uncertainty. This is one reason consciousness science has become more comparative. Researchers now study awareness across ages, species, altered states, and clinical conditions. By doing so, they can ask which features of consciousness are common, which are rare, and which seem to require more specialized forms of brain organization. Even now, there is no single universally accepted test that can prove consciousness in every possible case. This may feel frustrating, but it also reflects the depth of the subject. Consciousness is not a simple surface trait. It is something inferred from patterns, signals, behavior, and sometimes first-person report, all of which have limits. So the field relies on converging evidence. Scientists combine behavior, physiology, network activity, complexity measures, and report when they can. No one method is perfect, but together they form a stronger picture. This layered approach suits the subject because consciousness itself appears to be layered and multifaceted. That is why researchers increasingly speak of consciousness not as a single switch, but as a family of related capacities and experiences. Vividness, access, selfhood, connectedness, memory, and reflection may all vary separately in different states. This richer picture is less simple, but it fits the evidence more honestly. Some conditions mainly change vividness. Others change selfhood, agency, memory formation, or connection to the outside world. Consciousness can therefore change in many ways without simply vanishing. This is one reason the field has grown more careful about broad labels. Different altered states may look similar from the outside, yet differ profoundly inside. Simple slogans about consciousness often fail because they flatten all this variety into one phrase. Everyday life makes awareness feel obvious, but science has shown that it is anything but simple. The more closely it is studied, the more it reveals layers, gradations, dissociations, and forms that ordinary language never needed to describe. Some of the clearest progress has come from studying nearby contrasts rather than trying to solve the entire mystery in one step. Comparing dreaming with wakefulness, anesthesia with recovery, or one kind of report with another allows researchers to isolate particular features. Consciousness yields itself most readily when approached patiently and in detail. Sleep, anesthesia, brain injury, psychedelics, meditation, illusions, infancy, and animal research each illuminate a different side of awareness. None gives the whole answer, but each shows what changes when one piece of ordinary experience is removed, softened, or reorganized. Together, they form a kind of map drawn from many edges. The ordinary waking state can feel complete and final because it is the one most familiar to us. Yet research shows that it is only one configuration among many. Consciousness can become narrower, stranger, more internally generated, less self-focused, more emotionally fluid, or more fragmented, and still remain consciousness. What feels stable about awareness depends on continuous coordination among body signals, sensory input, memory, expectation, and attention. When these work together smoothly, the mind feels natural and whole. When they loosen or conflict, the hidden architecture becomes visible. Then the familiar self and world can appear in a different arrangement. When these integrations change, the world may still appear, but differently. It may feel less owned, less controlled, less sharp, less shared, or less tied to the ordinary story of the self. Consciousness can narrow into a small, quiet field or widen into something strange and richly unfamiliar. Its forms are more varied than they first seem. One of the strongest lessons of modern research is that consciousness is real, biologically grounded, and endlessly variable. It is not a mystical extra floating outside the body, but neither is it a simple mechanical output. It is a living process, rooted in the brain and body, that can brighten, soften, fragment, and gather itself in many ways. And perhaps that is why consciousness remains so compelling. Science can measure its patterns, compare its states, and trace many of its conditions. Yet consciousness is also the very medium through which every question is asked in the first place. It is both the subject of inquiry and the quiet presence behind inquiry itself. So as these ideas settle and grow still, the mind can rest for a while inside that simple mystery of being here, aware and gently passing through the dark.